2017, so Happy New Year, everybody. Have a lot of announcements tonight, but I'll start with some very sad news. Since we've last met, there have been 3 deaths of folks all of us know, and folks who are very active and influential in town government, and so the first one was Dr. Bob Sperber, who passed away right before Christmas. And Dr. Sperber, I had the privilege of getting to know him just only in the last few years, there was a life achievement celebration back in the spring. There was a great video that was made for that went through a kind of an oral history of his life and a lot of the things within the schools that we take for granted. He was the superintendent of schools for good almost 20 years, I guess, starting in 1964. A lot of things we take for granted now, things like extended day and Metgo and Beep, school within a school in the high school. He was a visionary who got that started, and even after he left Brookline, he went to Boston University, was involved with the Chelsea school system when Boston University was running that. And he had been sick for a while, so very, very sad to see him go. And then right after that, we were stunned by the news of Frank Farlow passing away due to a heart attack very suddenly. And Frank was the inspiration behind PAX, and I see his co-chair sitting in the audience. And I was just stunned.
He was also a town meeting member for many, many years.
Right. Just a person of impeccable values who lived his values and advocated his values. Just a very inspirational person. And then just this weekend, we lost Marcia Heist, who was a long time on the school committee. I think she came off the school committee, about 10-ish years ago? Mid 2000s.
2005, I think.
2005. She was chair for a while. I know Nancy Heller served with her on the school committee. She was a mentor to many people coming in through the school committee. And just very sad to see her go too. Anyone else like to say anything?
Yeah. I'll say about Bob Sperber, I had tremendous respect for him, and he always stood up for what he believed in and wasn't afraid to give you his opinion. It's long after his paid job with the town ended as a citizen of the town, he was deeply involved in many, many aspects of things, and I think we all worked with him on the last override, for instance. So, and I know he even in recent years was volunteering to help with the Archdiocese of Boston, the Catholic school system, as a volunteer, and they gave him a big award for stepping up and doing that. I want to say about Frank Farlow that one of the things I really appreciated about Frank was he really understood the concept of having some civility in our public, discourse, and you could maybe disagree with him on an issue, but you knew you were going to have, a civil and thoughtful discussion on that issue. And yeah, I think we're going to all miss him. And Marcia was not only a mentor to people going onto the school committee, but I think to many of us when we started out in politics, Marcia either, encouraged us to jump in or, gave us a sort of game plan of how to get through an election. So, yeah.
Selectman Franco.
I'll say I am deeply thankful to all three of these individuals, to Dr. Sperber, to Frank Farlow, and to Marcia Heist. Dr. Sperber and Marcia, I am the recipient of a Brookline education, and both of them played a large role in shaping the public school system that I enjoyed when I was younger. Dr. Sperber left the superintendency, I think, about 5 years before I entered the school system, but there's no doubt that he set the foundation on which Jim Walsh built. And Marcia Heist, of course, was a longtime school committee member, was on the school committee as I went through high school, and her advocacy, even before she entered the school committee, really shaped the trajectory, the pedagogy that was present in the Brookline Public Schools. And then Frank Farlow, of course, was in many ways the conscience of town meeting. He brought so many resolutions and drew our attention to problems both locally but also around the world. So I'm thankful to all three of these individuals, and they will certainly be sorely missed.
Selectman Heller.
Well, it does strike me that we lost three people, all of whom had tremendous integrity and really believed and lived what they believed and advocated for what they believed. Bob Sperber, one of the things that hasn't been mentioned too much is that when Bob Sperber was superintendent when Prop 2.5 came into being, and he was so distressed at the thought that the many, many wonderful improvements that he'd made in Brookline school system would be gutted and that the budget would suffer terribly, and it did suffer in the very beginning, certainly, and it continues to be a struggle today, as we all know, that he decided he would rather go elsewhere than see the things that he had advocated for and implemented dismantled or stymied. And I think in a lot of cases that they've not necessarily been dismantled, but stymied certainly because of the lack of money. And Bob was always, even though he was no longer the superintendent, but he kept an eye on us school committee folks. And he was determined that we should do our best for the schools, and he was always a cheerleader for me. He was always a cheerleader for the efforts, some of the efforts that I was involved in, the overrides, for instance. He gave invaluable advice about that, and you could always count on him to help in whatever way he could. Frank, I can't remember a PAX without Frank. I think, my first thought when I heard that he had passed is that Brookline is not going to be the same because he was so determined and but in a very thoughtful way with much integrity, much morality. He really, and again, as I think Selectman Daley said, you could have a discussion with him, you could disagree, but there were never hard feelings. He was always an excellent person to bat something back and forth because he saw so many of the different issues and he understood so much of what was going on. He could really help educate you as he was debating with you. Marcia, Marcia was a dear friend as well as a colleague on the school committee, and her son had gone to devotion, so she was a devotion parent and in the PTO as I was, and she really put up a valiant fight against her disease, as she did in everything. And one of the things about her is that she was so incredibly cheerful, always. Visited her not long ago, and she didn't want to talk about her health or herself and the struggles she was going through. She wanted to talk about what's going on in the town, and she wanted to hear about the latest, I remember she wanted to talk about the election. She wanted to talk about the selection of the process of selecting a school site, that kind of thing. She was always very gracious in offering her help to people, and again, a staunch advocate for the schools, and she will definitely be missed. And my thoughts go out to the families of all three of these wonderful people.
Selectman Green.
Tonight we're remembering three people who really made major contributions to our town governance, and the issues that many of us are concerned with and committed to. I did not know Marcia Heist, but I'll take everyone's word that she was the type of person that you described. I did know Bob Sperber not very well, not very long, and not very well. But in my experience, as someone who's actually sat on a school board in the past, he's the type of superintendent that I think schools really need. Not just good in terms of the details of running a school system, but also forward-thinking and really considering the broader issues that are presented in education and in the relationship of schools to the community. In terms of thinking of Bob Sperber, that's the thing that sort of comes to my mind. Frank Farlow. Frank and I shared an education at a small Quaker college outside of Philadelphia, and I think that Quaker tradition, or I could see in many of Frank's work, that Quaker tradition, unwavering commitment to peace and reconciliation, to finding and helping the humanity in all people. One thing that Frank was involved with prior to his passing was talking to members of the Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations Commission, the police chief, and myself about an issue that's going to come up on our agenda later on. That's sanctuary city, a question of whether Brookline should be a sanctuary city and what that means. I think that reflects, the fact that the humanity of all people, irrespective of whether a government organization considers them legal, is very important to him. And hopefully, in the work that we can do, we can both be guided by Frank's commitment and wisdom, as well as motivated to really follow through on some of his instincts. I'd like to add one other person who passed away recently. Someone not involved, at least to my knowledge, in town government, but who was very significant in the area of international human rights and economic rights, and that was Hope Lewis. She was a black woman who was a professor at Northeastern University who lived here in Brookline. Few people knew how significant she was. She lived in a building with Edie Brickman, and Edie was not really aware of how incredible accomplished she was, even though she knew her from living one floor below her. I mention her because she is a very accomplished black professional living here in Brookline that unfortunately too many people don't know about, including me, much to my embarrassment. But I want to just mention that she passed away beginning of December, and Northeastern has a nice memorial on their website regarding her. So.
Okay. I'd like us to observe a moment of silence for Bob Sperber, Frank Farlow, Marcia Heist, and Hope Lewis. Okay, thank you. Continuing, there's a whole bunch of meetings coming up. It was quiet right before the holidays, and now we're gearing up with town government. This Thursday, there's a joint meeting of the school committee and the Board of Selectmen starting at 7 to interview the candidates for the vacancy of the school committee, and I just learned, and this is news, there are 16 folks who have applied for that opening, so there'll be 16 people being,
For a 4-month job.
right.
It pays nothing.
That pays nothing, yeah.
Right. And then we're hoping to have a vote on the 10th, a week from today. There's a ninth, so that's the school committee Board of Selectmen. There's at 5:30 on Thursday, there's a reception for Rebecca Stone, who stepped off the school committee and for whose position the 16 folks are applying. There's a ninth school meeting with a focus on traffic tomorrow at 7 o'clock at the Heath School. There is a joint meeting of the Economic Development Advisory Board and the Housing Advisory Board for a presentation on 2 proposed developments, one at Waldo, the so-called Waldo Durgan corner in Coolidge Corner, and that's at Pleasant and John Street. This is a proposal hopefully instead of a proposed 21-story tower. And then also being shown to us is a proposal for redevelopment of the Holiday Inn on Beacon Street. So that should be very interesting. And then the next night, on the 10th, we're going to be voting to begin a committee process to look at those proposals and decide how much development do we want to accept and get a process going towards town meeting. So a lot of happenings over there. And then also at the same time, there's a meeting, a ninth school meeting on the 9th at the Heath School, talking about the process and whatnot, which, and then on the 12th, there's a high school community meeting talking about the educational plan for the high school expansion. That's 7 o'clock at the Black Box at the high school. And then on the 16th is the Martin Luther King event at the Coolidge Corner Cinema with a theme, Confronting Bias in Brookline. And it's free, but you're going to need tickets, and tickets can be had online at brooklinemlk.eventbrite.com. So, and the last few times, the room has been full.
Right.
And we've run out of tickets. And it looks like it's going to be an interesting program.
Yeah, it'll be I think it'll be a very interesting program. We're going to start off with some poetry to sort of give people a sense of the power of, the written word to say things that the power of poetry to say things that many times get lost in too many words of prose. And then we're going to have a keynote speaker, Richard Pinderhughes, who's involved with diversity training and education at an organization called Visions, Inc. And then the police chief and the superintendent of schools will provide a summary of steps they're taking to address issues of bias, implicit bias, in their domains. And then we're going to have Rasan Hall, who's with the ACLU, to respond to what the previous speakers have spoken about in terms of his critique as well as his suggestions as to how we can improve on what we're doing. So I think it would be from the standpoint of really learning and thinking through some of these important issues, a very good program. And there'll be a period of audience interaction too.
Okay. Any other announcements? This is the longest set of announcements, but there's a lot going on. So, okay, yeah.
I think you missed the Brookline High School Expansion Study Committee.
Yeah, that's
That's the 11th.
the 11th. I had it as the 12th.
The 12th is a community meeting that focuses on the educational plan. We don't really have any information yet about all of the other myriad issues, but we do have some information about the educational plan. So we're sharing that. But the actual meeting, deliberation of the committee, the advisory committee itself, will happen on the 11th.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we're actually having a ninth school at Baldwin meeting on the 11th as well, aren't we, Mo? The other two meetings you mentioned in relation to that project were the public meetings where people get to speak, but the committee, which of course is open to the public,
Right. The
I think
11th
is also on the 11th in the morning.
Oh, okay, so we're in the evening.
Okay.
Somebody can spend their day going from
Yeah.
one to another.
A lot of meetings coming up, and this isn't even town meeting season. Wow. Okay, so getting to our miscellaneous calendar, we have a couple of short items before we get into the main events. So first is the minutes. We have minutes for the joint meeting that we had back in October 13th, and then with the minutes of December 13th, I have a couple of minor changes, and the minutes of December 20th.
Yeah, I had some changes, I think, on the 20th, which I've given to Kate.
So I will move in omnibus fashion approval of the minutes as amended for October 13th, the joint session piece, December 13th, and December 20th. All those in favor, please say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman Franco?
Aye.
Selectman Heller?
Aye.
Selectman Green?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. And the next item is a lease at 62 Harvard Street. It's an amendment to an existing lease. Ms. Dunn, tell us what's happening. Why are we here?
Good evening. We are here to add a classroom to the existing lease at 62 Harvard on the third floor, approximately 920 square feet for an additional $26,500 to the original lease for the third floor of the classrooms for this year for the Pierce School.
Okay. Any questions or comments? Okay, I'll move that we approve the First Amendment to the Town of Brookline School Space Lease for 62 Harvard Street. All those in favor, please say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman Franco?
Aye.
Selectman Heller? Selectman Green?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And the last item on our miscellaneous calendar is the question of accepting a gift from Chestnut Hill Realty for an amount of up to $10,000 to support the creation of a zoning bylaw amendment necessary to implement the Hancock Village Memorandum of Understanding.
Mr. Chairman, as you know, this board entered into a memorandum of agreement with the Chestnut Hill Realty to adjust the development at Hancock Village, which will have to go before town meeting in the spring, and that requires the crafting of a zoning amendment to implement the terms and conditions of the MOA, among other things. We have received an offer from Chestnut Hill Realty to support the costs of the legal and related expenses of doing that. There are no strings attached to this, so we can and will hire a firm of our choosing, and I would strongly encourage the board to accept this gift under the terms of Mass General Laws, Chapter 44, Section 53A.
So in other words, we're going to be engaging an attorney to represent our interests in drafting the zoning bylaw, and Chestnut Hill Realty will be paying for it.
That is correct.
That's the net effect of this. Any questions, comments? Okay, I'll move that we accept the gift from Chestnut Hill Realty for an amount of up to $10,000 to support the creation of a zoning bylaw necessary to implement the Hancock Village Memorandum of Understanding. Actually, I'm going to amend the language of the vote in the creation of a zoning or general bylaw necessary to implement the Hancock Village, because there might be a piece in the general bylaw that we're amending. All those in favor, please say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman Franco?
Aye.
Selectman Hiller?
Aye.
Selectman Green?
Aye.
And chair votes aye. Okay, now to our main calendar. Pay as you throw. There's been a lot of discussion, a couple of times at town meeting at this point. We had a public hearing a few weeks ago. We have where we saw the outlines of a pay-as-you-throw proposal, and this is a hybrid pay-as-you-throw proposal, and now we're getting down to decision time. So, Commissioner Papasturgeon, why don't you outline your recommendation to us?
Okay. I'm pleased to be here once again to recommend the adoption of a hybrid pay-as-you-throw system that, as you say, uses semi-automated collection of wheel carts for municipal solid waste. The board previously had voted to approve the concept of automated collection and had authorized the purchase of two 32 cubic yard side loader refuse packers after a presentation that I had made to you in 2016. Actually, it was late 2015 it was, and you made that authorization at the beginning of 2016. But since that time, the board has held two public hearings, first one in May of 2016, at which time I outlined the general principles of this program, and then most recently in December of 2016, December 13th, you also obtained we held a public hearing to obtain public comment on this proposal. At that time, I went into great detail on the aspects of the program that included the cart sizing, the pricing, the waiver and exception systems that was approved by town meeting in last year, and some of the implementation issues that the Department of Public Works has been dealing with. You also heard at the last public hearing a proposal by Dick Benka, who I have the greatest respect for, who we outlined an alternative fee structure, and I'll make a few comments about that at this point to support why I am recommending to you that you adopt the original fee structure that I had proposed in both public hearings. Mr. Benka's analysis was based on the inclusion of all components of solid waste collection, not just municipal solid waste, but it also included the collection and disposal of yard waste and of recycling, and that included collection and processing of single-stream recycling. He calculated the fully allocated costs for actual tonnage that reduces the revenue by the cost recovery percent to yield the targeted revenue. I know there's a lot of words there, but basically he calculated the fully allocated costs of all aspects of solid waste collection, yard waste, and recycling, added all that to the total pricing scheme, came up with a fee structure for each container based on those costs, and then those are allocated over the actual tonnage, which is, in our case, the most recent is 9,100 tons annually. Our cost recovery is projected for FY18 in sanitation to be about 75%, meaning that what we generate from the refuse fee revenue generates 75% of the total cost of the operation of the sanitation system. The calculation that he proposed tends to minimize the difference in cost between the different cart sizes. Actually, it's about $20, give or take, between the different size carts. You remember that we had proposed 3 different size carts, a 35-gallon, 65-gallon, and a 95-gallon. His proposal outlines about a $20 cost between each cart size. but yet yields the same targeted revenue, and in this case, $2.8 million that we had outlined as our goal going into the program. One of the goals of the program was to make sure that we generated at least the same amount of revenue as the current refuse fee. He does this by increasing the cost of the smaller carts and decreasing the costs of the larger carts. The probable result of a scenario like that would probably be in the effect of rendering a multi-size cart system to a single-size cart system. If you were forced with purchasing a 35-gallon waste cart or a 65-gallon waste cart, and the only difference for an entire year between the two was $20, I'm pretty sure which cart that you would choose. And if that were the case, we might as well stand here and propose a single cart system of a 65-gallon cart and forget all the rest of it. The DPW pricing proposal I should just note that some of the mathematics behind it, the unit weight of household trash, it varies generally from about 100 to 300 pounds per cubic yard. And there's a lot of factors that determine how heavy or how light trash is, how wet it is, how much food waste is included. Food waste, of course, is very heavy, and other factors. That calculates down to 1/2 to 1.5 pounds per gallon. When we originally did our first calculation, we used 1.3 pounds per gallon because that was the number that would achieve the desired revenue that we were trying to target with the program. The 1.3 pounds per gallon was within the range of 1/2 to 1.5 pounds per gallon that is outlined by industry standards, so we felt it was a fair comparison. Mr. Banker pointed out, and rightly so, that if you take that calculation and multiply it over the total number of gallons that all of our various cart sizes will yield in a year, it adds up to a lot more than 9,100 tons, and he's correct. But it's a mathematical equation to achieve a desired result, keeping in mind that the important issue is maintaining the relationship between the different cart sizes, yet achieving the same revenue that you're set out to achieve. The actual weight of Brookline's trash, as I said, is 9,100 tons per year. That calculates to about 0.6 pounds per gallon. If you actually use this factor of 0.6 pounds per gallon, you could do the same exact calculation that Mr. Benka did, but in reverse. What would happen is you would generate, because of the drop in disposal costs, you would generate a lot less revenue than you targeted, which you would then have to go back and increase by a factor of the targeted revenue, a ratio of the targeted revenue divided by the actual revenue, to increase the fee back to get the actual $2.8 million that you're targeting. I know that I'm probably confusing you more, but I'm just trying to lay out some of the science behind what we did and let you know that it just wasn't a number pulled out of the air. So enough said about the pricing. I firmly believe that the pricing we should move forward with is the pricing that we recommended at the December 13th public hearing, as outlined in your packet. Some comments about the waiver and the exception system. This was passed by town meeting, as you know. We did support the development of that. We have concluded that accommodations will be made for households where there are no occupants able to maneuver a cart due to either physical or geographical limitations. Accommodations will allow for the sole use of bags, meaning bags without a cot, and those would be the custom bags, the overflow bags as we call them, or residents would be given the option, instead of using just bags that they would have to go out and purchase, of using an 18-gallon cot, which is the small one that you have seen in the past, for a price that's comparable to what it would cost you if you used one bag per week for 52 weeks a year. Price is the same. We have an application for waiver that residents who are interested in this waiver or exception system can fill out. It has two very specific conditions that you must check off, and it must be signed. That will then trigger a site inspection by the Public Works Department, and we will schedule that site visit with the applicant to go out and talk to him. But I want to emphasize that at no time will the Department of Public Works get involved or ask anyone for any medical documentation. That's not our field. That's not what we're about. We're going to rely solely upon our instincts, upon the information that the resident tells us, on the information that the resident applies for in the waiver. Look at the property, look at the limitations, and then make a decision based on that. So what happens next? Should you vote to adopt our hybrid pay-as-you-throw system, the Department of Public Works is prepared to move forward to meet an implementation target of June 1st, 2017. We will then begin immediately the cot selection period. It would be a rigorous period of about 4 to 6 weeks where we would give residents the opportunity to actually select their cot size. We would have already made arrangements to set up a standalone website. Residents can select their cot size by going online and doing it. We will be mailing out prepaid self-postage postcards where residents who don't have access to the internet can just check off the cot size that they like and pop the card back in the mail. Or, of course, they can also pick up the phone and call Public Works, and we will register their cot size over the phone. All this must happen in a pretty rigid timeline to meet the deadlines of this program, because as you can imagine, there are some lag times in terms of the manufacturer of the cots. We can't tell them to put the final order into the cot manufacturer until we know exactly how many cots of each particular size that we're going to need. So that won't happen until mid-March when the selection period closes. The order will then be put in, and there's about a 6-week lag time on getting the cots manufactured and delivered to the town. There are a couple of auxiliary contracts that will have to be brought before the board once you adopt, if you adopt pay-as-you-throw. The first contract would be, and I'd be prepared to bring these back to you next week, would be a contract with a company called Waste Zero, who would handle all the marketing, manufacturing, and distribution of the overflow bags. These would be custom imprinted bags that would be available at local retailers for sale. Waste Zero handles all of the logistics of that. They take a suggested marketing area from us. We tell them which markets we would like to see the product available at. They handle all the negotiations with the retailers, provide the bags, and the revenue from the sale of the bags is then returned to the town of Brookline and deposited in our account. There's a second contract that I'm pretty excited about talking to you about, and I'll go into more detail with this next week if and when I bring it back to you. This is a contract with a company called Simple Recycling of Massachusetts, who is offering municipalities with a very unique ability to collect free of charge what they call soft recyclables. These would be, or to make it simple, items such as clothing, shoes, hats, toys, blankets, curtains, pillows, small furniture and appliances, radios, lamps, tools, household electronics, all those types of things that really don't belong in the solid waste container, and you really can't get into the single stream container, but yet you want to get rid of, what would happen is that every resident in town would be provided with a free, different color-coded plastic bag, heavy-duty plastic bag, which would give you the ability to put in as many items as you wanted that would fit in the bag, and then immediately adjacent to the bag, any other items that didn't fit in the bag, but you want to get rid of that fits the soft recyclable NOMR. A company would come in and pick those items up at the curb on your collection day, free of charge, no cost to the town of Brookline, no cost to you for the bag even. When they pick it up, they will leave a new bag in exchange for the full one at no cost to you. And as a bonus, the town gets 2 bonuses from this. Number one, we're able to save the disposal cost of that amount of tonnage that's not going into the waste stream, which is right now $74 a ton, not including the commercial offset, which drops it down a bit. But nonetheless, we'd be saving $74 a ton, and the company would then pay us back $20 a ton for the material that they collected. So it's a real good deal for the town. It doesn't cost us anything. We don't even touch the stuff. And it's a good way for residents to get rid of it.
Is this a one-shot deal, or it's every week?
Every week.
Really?
Wow.
Every week, yep. On your collection day.
Did
Yep.
you say, will they take books?
They'll take books too, yes.
Oh, really?
Yes. It's one more avenue for residents to get rid of trash without filling up their containers and being able to put it out at curbside and have it taken away. But yet getting some value from that in terms of recycling, recycled product.
When is that going to start?
If this all moves according to plan, we would be prepared to actually begin this program probably on April 1st. We wanted to get it started before we actually rolled out pay-as-you-throw. And that really may affect, once you make I'll tell you our thinking, if you make a selection of a particular card size during the selection period, which ends, say, in mid-March, this program will start up April 1st. You may find that the cart that you selected really isn't the cart that you need. And we are going to have a grace period once the carts are rolled out where people can change their cart size without any penalty for a short period of time. So I think it's all good news, but that's what's coming down the line. We would be prepared to submit both of these contracts and agreements to you by next Tuesday night for your execution. Should you vote to adopt pay-as-you-throw and allow this program to move forward. So I'll stop talking right now. And
So let's just talk a little about the exception program. I guess, confirmation and emphasis on the fact that you guys aren't going to be in the business of evaluating medical conditions. So somebody signs, I can't carry it out to the curb, a toter. What's going to happen?
I believe you have the form, and it was in your packet.
On the reverse of the votes.
But there's a form that residents can download, that'll be able to download from the website, or request one from Public Works. You fill out all the pertinent information, name, address, email address if you choose. There are 2 check boxes on this form. The first is, and I'll read them, due to a physical disability or limitation, I am unable to move my waste cart to and from the curb, and there is no able-bodied person residing with me able to move the cart. You can check that off, or you can check off that the geography of my building lot does not allow for the moving of a cart to and from the curb easily. And you can check off either one of those conditions, sign it, and return it to us. That will then trigger a site visit by one of our sanitation inspectors, who will call you and set up an appointment. He will come out and meet with you. and look at your property, and then if he agrees, then the waiver will be processed, and you'll be allowed at that point to use a overflow bag that you'll have to go out and purchase, just like anyone would for an overflow bag. But at the same time, we would then give you the option of selecting the 18-gallon cart as opposed to using just bags. If you find that that's easier to use, it's easier to maneuver, and it fits your needs, then it's a great solution, because it also then allows us to pick it up with the automated equipment. The automated trucks will pick up all the toters from 18 all the way up to 95. So you don't have to choose the cart. We'll offer it to you as a choice, and that will go from there.
Is that a permanent waiver, or is it good for 12 months?
The waiver would be essentially a permanent waiver. We are privy to changes in property ownership, so we would have a list of those folks who have the waiver, and if anything changes in regard to the property ownership, then the waiver would end at that point, of course, unless it was reapplied for by the new owner.
One thing it looks like you're setting yourself up for is a lot of disputes as to whether the geography, quote unquote, of a building is such that doesn't allow for the moving of the cart, as well as disputes over physical disability. Have you given any thought to how those will be resolved?
I think the geographic issue is fairly cut and dry. For instance, if you live on a hill, you have no driveway, you have no walkway, and you rely on 4 flights of stairs to get from point A to point B, I think that's a fairly easy one to
What about the hard
grant.
ones?
Excuse me?
What about the hard ones?
I think,
I'm sure that there are, plenty of situations that aren't that cut and dried.
and I agree with you, and it's really not a task that I wanted to undertake, but it was nonetheless the will of town meeting that we do this. We'll do the best we can to get through it, using the best judgment that we can use. Will there be some disputes? Perhaps. Will there be some properties that people apply for a waiver, and once we go out and look at it, it's denied? Perhaps. I honestly believe, I believe that the applications for waiver will be fairly limited to perhaps particular areas of town. You will get, I feel that the physical capacity to move a cart is a lot harder to deal with than the geographic. Relies a lot more, I believe, intuition. But it's not going to be an easy system, believe me. None of this is going to be easy. Just going with multiple size carts at multiple pricing schedules and waivers and exception systems, this is all cutting edge stuff. This is stuff that really hasn't been tried in other municipalities, so we'll do the best we can to get through it. I firmly believe that once we get through the initial implementation period and all this is behind us, that this system will run fairly smoothly, just like single stream recycling did.
Have you given any thought to an appeal process or appeal procedure where you've denied someone and they're complaining that it was improper denial?
Well, I'm sure that I'll get those calls, and we will deal with them if we get them. All I can say is that we're open to any possibility, and we'll deal with everything as it comes.
Selectman Heller.
I have a question about, that was raised from reading your memo here, your page 2 on the back, where it's a DPW proposal. And I guess my question is, if people live in say, a 2 or 3 family condo building, is there any impediment that you know of to their sharing a cart? They obviously need to get along and need to know what their own, limitations and rules are, but do they need to have 2 carts, or can they have, if they live in a in a 2-condo place or a 3-condo place? Do they need to have 3? Can they have 1?
The simple answer is yes. Here's the issue, and we've wrestled long and hard with this issue. We worry about certain landlords gaming the system, to put it bluntly. So you take a 3-unit building or a 5-unit building, or however big it is, or say ordinarily that landlord would select 3 35-gallon containers. Instead, he opts to select 2 65s or 1 95. He'll be allowed to do that. However, the fee that he will have to pay will be based on the minimum count, the minimum charge of 1 35-gallon container per unit. So if he wants to select a different configuration of containers, he's free to do that for various reasons, for storage reasons or whatnot, or however he wants to justify it. He's free to do that, but the charge will be based on the number of units times a 35-gallon container, even if the configuration that he chooses is a lesser amount.
But that's for a system, you're thinking of that in terms of rentals. And, you know, somebody owns the property, is renting it to someone else, and is trying to work around the system. I'm thinking of 3 condos, 3 different owners who all live there, and they have 1 building, and they have tight storage space, and they like to only have 1 container or 2 containers rather than 3.
But the principle holds whether it's rental property or ownership property. Really doesn't change the fact that you know, folks could get together to game the system.
Right.
And we, you know, it's the only way that we could come up with to make sure that number one, the town doesn't take a hit and take a loss on all of this, and that people are treated fairly and evenly. It's the only way we could come up with it.
Right.
So.
You mentioned here that in number 7 in your list, that households may opt out of municipal collection and contract privately with a waste hauler if deemed to be more cost effective.
Well, it's...
Is that the only reason?
No. Anybody can opt out of municipal collection that they want. And right now, we only collect from pretty much half the households in town.
So anybody is free, if they don't like the system or they don't like whatever. They don't have to it just doesn't have to be based on cost.
The only thing that we require is we require a copy of your contract with the private hauler to make sure that someone is taking care of your trash in a professional manner. But other than that, you're free to make any choice you want. I only put the cost-effective piece down because generally that's the criteria that most people use. You know, is it cost-effective to go with the town or go with a private hauler?
Well, in some cases, I think maybe the bigger buildings like to have collections twice per week.
Yeah, and most of the larger buildings are on private collection right now. So that won't change.
A couple of questions. What's going to happen if somebody puts out trash not in a bag, not in a town authorized toter? It's a student. Let's say it's in a student area. How are we going to enforce that?
We realize that we're going to have to step up, at least for a short period of time, the enforcement and all this until people get comfortable with it. We will not pick up trash if it's not in either the cart or a custom overflow bag. If something else is put out there, we'll have our inspectors will be out in the field along with the collection trucks, and the owner of the property will be cited for that. In the case of you know, student housing or whatnot, it's the landlord who's responsible for that. The landlord is responsible by regulation, by town regulation, to make sure that he provides refuse collection for all of his residents. So we will be issuing citations, we will be issuing warnings, and that's all going to be, you know, stepped up, I think, for at least a short period of time until all of this calms down.
So then back to the exception system. With the visit, if somebody, they check the box due to physical disability limitation, I can't get the cart to the street, and I want to do the bag, how are you going to evaluate that? You know, what you know, you're going to have a site visit. What are you going to be considering? You know, what's the purpose of the site visit?
Well, like I said, the geographic part of that is pretty easy. We can look at the property, we can look at the lot, and we can make a determination, is it really difficult?
Right,
but that's easy. If somebody has a physical handicap, that's a lot more subjective for us. It's not as easy for us. We're going to have to rely on what people are telling us.
Okay.
There's no way around it. You know, this is kind of like the honor system here. If you tell us that you're handicapped and you can't do it, and there's nobody in the house that lives with you that can do it, then I guess we have to issue you a waiver, and we go from there. So,
But they still have to purchase bags to,
Yes, they
in
do.
order to put out their trash.
that's
So
correct. Yeah.
Right.
They're still going to be subject to some cost.
Oh, sure. Yes.
Okay, and then the bags are going to be widely available at retailers?
Yes, they will. Yes. The bags will be available in rolls of 5 bags. Our pricing has priced them at $15 for a roll. That's $3 for a bag. We are right now compiling a list of all the retail establishments that we think it should be marketed at. We'll be turning that over to Waste Zero, who will then communicate with each of these establishments to actually roll it out.
Are the establishments that are not on your list things like restaurants and gas stations? I mean, in other words, are all retail food stores and similar establishments on your list? Pardon me?
A restaurant? Really?
No, they wouldn't be.
No, I'm saying that would be excluded, I presume.
Yes. It's generally going to be a store where you go to buy similar products now, a convenience store, a supermarket.
But we're not excluding
Hardware
any.
store, yeah.
We're not excluding any particular store because of size or.
No.
Okay.
Well, I don't think we would necessarily approach a clothing store.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But if it's a small.
Hardware stores.
Yes.
Convenience stores, places where you buy groceries and
Yeah.
home products.
Yes.
So, yeah. Selectman
Well,
Daley.
I'm going to say, I'm going to go with Andy's proposal. I think that the suggestions by Mr. Spiegel and Mr. Benka, which would have made the smaller bins more expensive and the larger bins less expensive, don't make sense to me, because we're trying to do two things here. We're trying to mechanize our waste collection system, both to save money and because we have a lot of injuries on the job and things from that. And but we're also trying to encourage people to put out less solid waste. And so, you know, to make it more attractive to get the larger bins seems to run counter to that. And, you know, we have many services in town where you don't pay exactly, I mean, saying someone should pay exactly for how much garbage they put out. Well, you know, when, you know, my kids were young and were in the schools, I was getting a major benefit from the town. Now my kids are grown and out of town, and I still pay taxes for other people's kids to go to school. I mean, there's you know, many services where we see it as a town-wide value. I mean, I feel that whether I put out a lot of garbage or not, I want the garbage in my neighborhood to all be collected in a appropriate manner so that we're not attracting, you know, animals and things, so that there's a benefit to me, even if I'm a low garbage producer, to seeing that everybody's garbage gets collected. So, and as Andy mentioned, I mean, we not only have the fees we pay for how much solid waste we move on to the next link in the chain, but we also have the salaries and benefits of our employees, we have the cost of the trucks, so there's some infrastructure costs and operating costs in addition to the actual amount poundage of garbage you produce. So I think that the system that Andy has suggested makes sense to me, and probably, if you really wanted to make people, you'd pay for their garbage or encourage less garbage, you'd go to a strict pay-as-you-throw system. But I think we all thought that this hybrid system is a good way to move people along, and it does have the benefit. I mean, if you were on a strict pay-as-you-throw system, you'd be using all the bags, and could not have the automated collection. So, I think this is a good compromise, meets our goals. I'm going to vote for what has been suggested by the commissioner.
I also intend to vote for the commissioner's pricing structure and scheme here. I agree with Selectman Daley that just, making it cheaper to throw out more is just not, or relatively cheaper, is not what we want to do. I mean, we want people to think about, can this thing that I'm going to throw out be recycled? And we want to reduce our solid waste and increase our recycling if we can. The fact that you're going to pick up bulky items like sofas and chairs and whatever is great in terms of, especially around May 15th to May 30th and, August 25th to September 10th or something, when the students are all moving in or out. There's a lot of that goes on in North Brookline, especially, throwing that stuff out. And when you said that you would beef up your inspections as well to make sure, I want to make sure that the landlords who are renting to this population will make sure that they're provided with the carts that they need to throw stuff out, that they don't have to go to the store and buy the bags, because I think that could be very problematic. That won't happen, is my worry. So I think that the exception system will make sure that in those situations that the people who are provided with that every rental unit is provided with a cart in order for people to not have to go and buy the bags themselves. And as long as they can throw out, they can put the sofas and the old chairs and the ratty tables out on the tree lawn, and then that's great. That'll work. So I hope that this system, and we'll see, we'll obviously have an opportunity to evaluate it, and you'll come back to us and tell us whether you think things are going well or not, and I'm sure we'll hear from everybody in Brookline about it as well.
Be assured that the Public Works Department is committed to making this program a success. We have, I think, pulled out all the stops to deal with all the concerns that people have had. And just to highlight a few that weren't really mentioned, yard waste and recycling will remain free and unlimited. The collection of what we call bulky waste, which is the sofas and the furniture and all that, will remain free. The only change now will be that we're going to ask you to call and make an appointment for us to pick it up, because no longer...
Don't you do that anyway?
Well, a lot of people do, but some people just put it out at the curb, and we used to pick it up with our regular packers because it all got crushed up with solid waste. So that will be handled a little bit different. It will require advance notice, but it will remain free. We have committed to offering 2 what we call amnesty collections per year, where we would advertise it and allow people in that 1 week period on your collection day to put out whatever you want to put out, and we won't worry about if it fits in the cart or goes into a bag. We'll pick it up that week, and those would probably be scheduled around different events that occur, when rubbish is generally the most, or maybe Labor Day or what have you. So I mentioned about the fact that, people can opt out of municipal collection now. And one other thing that nobody talked about, but we certainly thought about, was what happens to all the old barrels that people no longer can use. How are they going to get rid of them? We're not going to make the residents, pay to get rid of those. So from the time that we implement the new program, we're going to have a grace period where for 2, 3, or 4 weeks, we're going to allow people to, if they want to get rid of their old barrels, to put them out at curbside, just tip them upside down so we know that they're junk, and we'll collect them and take them away. We'll continue to pick up what we call white goods at no charge, which are refrigerators, washers, dryers, and all that kind of stuff. But once again, give us some advance notice, and we'll send a special truck down to pick it up. So, we've thought this thing to death, believe me, and nobody wants it to be as successful as we do. And you have our assurance that we're going to do everything we can to make it a success.
One of the other things that hasn't come up is the hazardous waste. I assume you're going to continue the program at the dump where you can come and bring paint or other materials that aren't appropriate for the regular solid waste stream.
Yes, that'll continue without change.
So I think I too am going to vote for the Commissioner's proposal. I think, philosophically, I'm okay with the price differential being the way it is. It's not so, if you want to keep a 65-gallon container, it's not so much more, but it's enough to make you think about it. I think compressing the schedule and having the lower end higher and having the rate difference not as much. I don't think we'll be able to. It won't encourage the reduction, as you said. The one thing. The one thing I've been thinking about is, okay, are we encouraging people to get the 35 when is that big enough for the average household? Because we really want to encourage the use of the barrels versus the bags. But I think having that grace period at the beginning where people can get experience and then change the barrel size could ameliorate that concern. Because frankly, I don't know which one I'll take.
I have some data that can enlighten you on that. We actually went out and did a route survey where we actually followed all the collection trucks around to every stop in town and recorded just what was put out at that stop in variables of 35-gallon containers. Did you put out 1 barrel? Did you put out 2 barrels or the equivalent thereof? And we actually recorded that data for the entire town and compiled it. And the results indicate that 61% of the stops that we make in town, now remember that we're collecting, these are the stops that are on municipal collection. 61% put out 1 35-gallon container or less. 61% of the town. 32% of the town put out 2 containers that were 35-gallon equivalents, or the equivalent of a 65. So you got 61%, a little bit over 32%. Very few residences, less than 3%, put out more containers than would be the equivalent of a 65-gallon container. So that was the data that we used to base our estimated quantities of each size cart to lay out the program, and that was based on hard data that we had collected. So the other note is if you take 9,100 tons, just do the mathematics. If you take 9,100 tons of refuse that we collect in a year's time, and divide that by the number of dwelling units that we pick up, a little over 13,000, and apply the weight factors that I had talked to you about earlier, the average stop puts out 26.5 pounds of trash a week. 26 pounds of trash will fit in a 35-gallon container.
Yeah, that average doesn't address the variability.
It's averages, no question, but nonetheless, it's the data.
So you could basically, save up some of the bulkier things that you might fill your trash with, like, if you had room to store it, like the packaging, some of that, most of that actually I find now is recyclable. It's paper or it's, some sort of material. Some of it is cellulose, which can't be recycled and has to be basically trashed, even though it's not as harmful for the environment. But, I guess the answer is if you can have these amnesty weeks, then that's the week when you put out a whole big plastic container of stuff.
Or our other collection program comes into play. Single stream recycling is meant for glass, cans, paper, cardboard, plastic, those types of things. But now we're going to give folks another avenue to put out stuff that, doesn't fit in either container, and that's this soft recyclable collection, which I think will take care of a lot of the other gray area products.
So could you say again what you expect to be, what items you expect to be in that soft recyclable? Books don't seem very soft to me.
It's basically all textiles.
Yeah.
Let's see, where am I?
So clothing,
shoes, hats, toys, blankets, curtains, pillows, small furniture, small appliances, radios, lamps, tools, household electronics, things like that have that can be recycled, but yet you wouldn't throw in your single stream container. You could throw it in your trash, but why would you do that if there's some sort of a market for it? So we're giving people another avenue to get rid of that stuff and at the same time be able to recycle it and get a revenue return from it.
So the vendor is going to be selling this stuff? Is that the idea?
He collects it curbside, he sorts it, and then whatever can be recycled, or not just recycled, reused. For instance, a lot of clothing can be reused. That goes to a different market. Electronics that can be recycled goes to a different market. He takes all of that, and it has some value to it, and he gives us a return on it. It's a good deal.
I'm wondering how the Salvation Army and the Epilepsy Foundation and the Vietnam vets are going to feel about the fact that,
Well, you certainly have that choice to make. You could certainly do that as well.
Because you can call them and they'll come pick it up.
Yeah. But, some of them, like the Epilepsy Foundation, if you call them, they're very picky as to what they'll take.
Well, that's true, and they don't like books.
Yeah, some of them also want it down by the curb, and we're not supposed to put stuff down by the curb unless
I never do
it's
that. I tell them they have to come to get it on my porch, or they don't get it.
Are we comfortable with the vote?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So there'll be two motions. One, move that the Board of Selectmen authorizes the implementation of a hybrid pay-as-you-throw and semi-automated solid waste collection system for all residents opting to participate in town waste collection services as follows. Users shall be limited to the disposal of trash in town-issued, variable-size wheeled carts of 35, 65, or 95-gallon capacity at the annual rate of $190, $252, and $312 respectively. In addition, official town-imprinted 30-gallon plastic bags will be available for purchase at local retail establishments for a fee of $15 per roll of 5 bags to be used for overflow refuse that does not fit within the selected wheeled carts. So that's the first motion. So why don't we vote that? All those in favor, please say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman Franco?
Aye.
Selectman Heller?
Aye.
Selectman Green?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. Second motion is that I move that the Board of Selectmen approves a policy to accommodate households where no occupants are able to maneuver a waste cart due to physical or geographical limitations by allowing the use of official overflow bags without a wheeled cart, or by the use of a special town-issued 18-gallon wheeled cart for the annual fee of $156. Said policy is incorporated within the attached document entitled the Waste Cart Waiver Application for Hybrid Pay-As-You-Throw, which will be up on our website. All those in favor, please say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman Franco?
Aye.
Selectman Heller?
Aye.
Selectman Green? Aye. And the chair votes aye.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your patience, and I just want to close by saying that Mr. Friedman's getting the first waiver, for sure. He's going to have waiver number 1, and I'm going to see to it personally.
It pays to come and sit at these meetings.
Next item is the Senior Tax Exemption Study Committee. Selectman Franco.
So this is a committee that was called for by Article 33 of the special town meeting. This is the article that was sponsored by town meeting member Susan Granoff. The charge before you is a draft charge. I've run it past Gary McCabe, our chief assessor. He thinks that it encompasses everything that he would be concerned about when talking about tax exemptions, property tax exemptions. I would encourage you to take a look at it over the next, let's say, 4 or 5 days, filter any comments to me. It's my intention to bring this back a week from today to the board along with a proposed slate for membership, and we'll start meeting shortly thereafter and bring back the results of the committee's work sometime in the late summer, most likely.
Okay. So we're not doing any voting today. This is just informational.
Correct.
With the goal of voting this next week.
Exactly.
Okay. Next item on the agenda is entitled Sanctuary City. And I just kind of set the stage for this. There's been a lot of interest, and I believe all of us up here have received emails and phone calls regarding how Brookline is reacting to the designation of a sanctuary city, and that's actually kind of a big discussion in that, you know, what really does that mean? Because there is no standard definition of what that does mean. And
But we should say that we have,
right,
since 1985.
I'm getting there.
Okay.
I'm getting there. The Brookline version of that is in 2 town meeting resolutions. One goes back to 1985, which focused on issues of concern back then, mainly refugees from El Salvador, Guatemala, and Haiti. So that resolution was kind of narrowly focused. And then in 2006, November 2006, town meeting had another resolution which reaffirmed the 1985 resolution, but then broadened it. And the salient, therefore, reads, the town of Brookline reaffirms its commitment as a sanctuary town, as declared by town meeting in 1985, and expands it now to include all undocumented immigrants from all countries. And then it talks about some legislation that was pending back then, calls on the U.S. Homeland Security to declare a moratorium on immigration raids. It affirms basic human rights and dignity of every human being. we shouldn't use the word illegal to describe human beings and the use of the word aliens to describe immigrants. And I think the immigration folks still use that word. I find it kind of offensive. And then we urge the U.S. Senate to defeat some specific legislation. But it doesn't get into any really specific town policies in operation, and doesn't talk about the activities of our police department. Since that time, and this was 10 years ago, but since that time, ICE, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, that's the name of the agency, has kind of stepped up in enforcement, and there's a program that's been implemented called Secure Communities, which we participate in, and some of the surrounding towns and cities have been looking at this, especially now that with the incoming federal administration of, I shudder to say, President Trump, and some of the positions that he ran on gives me, and I suspect some in this board, many in our community, a lot of concern and a lot of heartache about what's coming. So I thought it would be good to start off a community discussion and a community process with kind of establishing a fact base. And that's what this meeting is all about, is to establish a fact base. And the question I'd like to ask the police chief, who's here, Police Chief O'Leary, is to describe the police department's policies and then contrast it with some of the surrounding communities. And that would be the first step in us as a board and Brookline as a community starting to look at this issue as we go forward.
Yeah, can I add one, I think, correction, and that is secure, and correct me if I'm wrong, Secure Cities has been replaced by a priority enforcement program. Is that correct?
That's my understanding.
Okay, which actually is a very important point in terms of the issue of deportation of criminal immigrants versus other people.
Okay.
Good evening. I'll try to give a little bit of historical perspective on it, and then I do have some policies that I got from neighboring communities where I can go into them a little bit. But in 2012, I think when we first came up with our procedure on handling warrants or people that have warrants against them lodged by ICE or ICE detainees based on the Secure Communities Act. And of that act, I'll paraphrase the order that we have. When we make an arrest of any subject, no matter where they're from or their nationality, they're submitted to a fingerprint, us taking their fingerprints, computer-based. They go to the Mass State Police. The Mass has a sharing agreement with the FBI, who in turn has a sharing agreement with ICE. And ICE, after they go through those three databases, they get back to us on the true identity of the person that we have under arrest based on their fingerprint checks. Now, when ICE has an action against one of the individuals that we have under arrest, it will come back in the form of either an arrest warrant that's issued by ICE, which we would handle very similar to a warrant from out of state. And we would do that by confirming with the issuing department that the warrant is still in effect, that is for the subject that we have under arrest, and if they're going to come and get them or not. If they're not going to come and get them, we won't lodge anything against them. But if they say they're going to come and get them, they'll get a fugitive from justice warrant and they'll be taken to court, and court will most likely set a high bail or hold them for the other state to come and get them. In the case of an immigration warrant, my understanding is that we send them to court, and then the ICE will come and get them and take them and, I think, arraign them in federal court. I'm not positive about that, but I think that's how it goes. But anyhow, we turn them over to the court. The second way that we would become involved in an ICE notification is if they have an ICE detainer lodged on a person. Now, an ICE detainer is a civil commitment or a civil order. It's not an arrest warrant. It's not vetted through a judge. They have their standards on how they rank the people that they're going to lodge the ICE detainers on and whether they're going to come out and get them. We would go through the same process. The subject that we have under arrest and charged for a crime in Brookline we would verify with ICE that the detainer is for that person, that the person we have in custody is the subject that they have the ICE detainer on, and we'll ask the question if they will or will not come out and get them. If they don't come out and get them, we don't do anything with it. If they say they're going to come out and get them, they have 48 hours to come out. We hold them on that detainer, but they are subject to bail for the charges that they're arrested on in Brookline. But we don't set the bail commissioner sets the bail, but we do have to inform the bail commissioner that the subject has an ICE detainer. And in reality, most times they don't get bailed at that time, and we turn them over to court. When they go to court, it's out of our hands. It's up to the court to decide what they want to do, if they want to hold them, if they don't want to hold them. But however, if they're held strictly on the ICE detainer, ICE has 48 hours to pick them up. Those are really the two incidents or two reasons that we would come in contact and inquire about someone's ICE status. We do not routinely ask people for their immigration status. We do not participate in raids. I don't remember the last time a raid had taken place. I think it's somewhere in my mind, it's sometime in the 80s when I was a young patrol officer, that there was a raid in some place down at Beacon Street. We would not participate in the raid. We would not be an active participant. I think, if anything, we'd do what most other police departments would do, is to go there and make sure that public safety is upheld, that there's no one that's going to dispute what's going on, and that whatever has to get done gets done to ensuring the safety of all. We do participate in a couple of other programs that pertain to people that are in the country. We participate in the U visa program. The U visa program is a program where someone is a victim of a crime, or I think it's a victim of a crime. We've used it mostly in sexual assaults or domestic violence incidents, where we will support a person, regardless of their immigration status, to remain in the country, to see through the court process, but also to ensure their safety. And I know that there's a period of time, and I'm not exactly sure of the outside limit. In my mind, I think 4 years, but I'm not sure, because we have re-upped victims' U visas. And the other thing that we participate in is consulate notification. When a subject is placed under arrest for anything in town and they're in custody with us, we will, and they're not from this country, they're maybe a student from another country going to school here, we would inquire if they want us to notify their consulate that they are under arrest in Brookline. Most people decline, as you could figure out why, but some people do say, and we abide by that, and we'll notify the consulate that we have so-and-so under arrest in Brookline. So those are what we do. Like I said, we put that in place in 2012 in response to secure communities. I know that since that time, they've set their priorities, that they're going to come out and pick people up that have long criminal records, are subject or have warrants in other jurisdictions for crimes. I've been told, and I've been to meetings where ICE has said, we don't have room to come and pick up people that have an ICE detainer for non-criminal offenses, but I think there is a way that happens when people come into the country illegally, get deported, and come back in again and caught again, and I think that time what could be a civil thing turns into a criminal violation, but that's a federal offense. That's beyond our capacity. Some of our neighboring communities, I think I looked at Boston, Cambridge, Newton, Somerville, and then Amherst has one too. Just about all of those communities hold the subjects on arrest warrants and on ICE detainers, but they set criteria for the ICE detainer. That's different from what we have. They mostly do it like Boston, Somerville, Cambridge, or Somerville and Cambridge do it by saying they can hold, the police department can make a decision to hold based on a legitimate law enforcement purposes not related to immigration or to a criminal warrant. Like I said, Somerville has the discretion to do that. Cambridge does under that. But Cambridge can hold for a couple more other reasons, like if they make bail on their charges, they can hold them strictly on the ICE detainer, as long as it's for public safety purposes. Newton, they don't stop and inquire with people about immigration, their immigration status, but they may hold a person that's suspected of criminal activity, of committed a felony, or is posing a threat to the safety of the public. And they're similar to what we do, except they do set that additional criteria that we don't have at this point. But I'm pretty sure that their rules and their procedures were put in place after us. We just never updated it from 2012.
Selectman Daley?
Yeah, I think our concern is about, particularly, not about people who've committed crimes, but, and you mentioned you don't participate in raids, but say you do a traffic stop and you have some reason to suspect that the person in the car is illegal. Would they just get a ticket, or would there, I mean, you mentioned that you fingerprint and send on the fingerprints of everybody who is taken into custody. But ordinarily, for a traffic stop, you wouldn't be taking somebody into custody. I mean, would you vary your procedure because you suspected the person in the car in the traffic stop was illegal?
I would say it depends on the circumstances, and I think, I can't say that that's never happened, because if you get somebody that's driving a car and they do not produce a license and they're not telling you the truth, you are going to inquire as to who that person is. So at that case, maybe that question is asked. But if you don't have a license and commit a violation, you are subject to arrest.
Okay. What about, you mentioned the U visa program. So say somebody is a victim of domestic abuse or something like that. So not the criminal, not the one who's perpetrated the abuse, but the victim. And you suspect that the victim to do with anything Brookline did, but while the case is pending, immigration catches up with them and says...
No, a lot of times for domestic violence or for a sexual assault or a rape, they would be in contact with us, with our domestic violence advocates, with our investigators, with the DA's office, and that's probably going to come up in conversation as to the person's status in this country. If their visa is running out or if their green card is expiring, we will then fill out the paperwork and file it with ICE that we want to give this person the ability to stay in the country.
Okay,
so
well, what would be our policy if someone's, they're not here on it's not a visa about to expire or a green card, but they're just here illegally, but they are a victim of a crime?
And we want them to stay in the country, we would go ahead and file that U visa.
Okay, but let me sort of follow up on the domestic violence situation, where you, and I think this still occurs a lot, you have an incident between two people. One is clearly the victim, but because of circumstances, both are charged. And it may be that the victim fought back and whatever. That victim is going to be fingerprinted, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so therefore, that victim automatically gets into the ICE system? Or is there a way that that can be
No,
prevented?
excuse me, they wouldn't get into the ICE system based on our arrest.
Well, but they would be fingerprinted. The fingerprints would go to the state, what was it called, fingerprint identification system?
But we don't have any ability to charge them with a federal crime.
But once they get into the state fingerprint identification system, they get into the federal system, unless we can stop the state from sending it to the FBI. Once it gets to the FBI, it automatically goes to ICE, and ICE can determine that this person, a victim, is in the country without documentation. And right now, under the Priority Enforcement Program, that's probably not a problem. But we're sort of considering the future where it's not priority enforcement that the federal government is concerned with, but enforcement against all people who are undocumented. So you have a victim who is in the system and potentially could be deported because we put their fingerprints into a system that gets into ICE. So I guess that's a problem. So I guess my question is there currently a way that we can prevent those fingerprints from getting into the federal system? I mean, if we can't, then we're basically at the mercy of whatever is coming down.
When we make an arrest, the fingerprints are taken at booking.
Right.
So they go down through that process for identification purposes,
In
immediately.
Brookline?
Pardon me?
They're in Brookline still.
They're in, the subject, the party that's under arrest is in Brookline, but the fingerprints are transmitted immediately
To the state.
to the state, and then immediately goes to FBI, and then to the ICE, then back.
So,
Okay, but let me give you a scenario that I
Oh, wait,
think
let
was
me-
what
let me
Bernard's
ask-
trying to get at. But
yeah, so how do we protect this victim from being deported? Because, in a domestic violence case, if she's arrested, or he's arrested,
I can give you an example of that, that we had probably 3 years ago, but we ended up in a lawsuit by one of the two subjects that we arrested. One party got arrested one day based on a statement that was made to us. Further investigation resulted in, I think it was an arrest, or it was a charge, one or the other. Further investigation revealed that the party that was leveling the allegations was actually the aggressor. And we arrested the party that made the initial allegations. We submitted a U visa for the first individual that we interacted with. That person stayed in this country and testified against the other party. The second party filed a court case, a lawsuit against us, saying that he's the one that should have gotten the U visa. Fortunately, the judge upheld what we did, and the case got dismissed. But we had no pushback from ICE, no pushback from anybody else. We did the U visa on who we felt was the victim, and that person stayed in the country.
what happens when so the case is over, and this person who's been staying on the U visa to testify against the perpetrator, then is subject to deportation, or do they have any opportunity to legitimize their?
Yes, they do. And
Okay.
I know at least one occasion when we have assisted a person to obtain citizenship status based on being a victim of a crime.
but I guess U visa is a separate issue from what I'm trying to get at, and that is, let's take it out of the domestic violence context, but a situation where you've arrested someone for a minor crime, not someone who is a threat, to the community or the nation, and because you fingerprinted them, they're in the ICE system. The ICE, program or the agency sees that this person is undocumented and begins deportation. I guess my concern is that in situations of arrest where the person is not, the type of risk to the community that would justify deportation, the system is set up so that they are automatically in the ICE system, and we anticipate in the future that that ICE system is going to be enforced more aggressively and more inhumanely than it is currently.
The only, well, the thing that might not trigger that is that if the person came into the country illegally, how does ICE even know they're here
You tell them.
illegally?
You're giving them their fingerprints.
But,
you're
so
not
they run it
fingerprinting
against
the
it,
victim, are
but
you?
they run it against their database, right? And the guy's not in their database.
Right.
Okay,
So they don't- so they don't-
That person's lucky.
So they don't know. And then, and the second part of that is that I really don't think that they come out based on somebody in the country that illegally, at least the first time, that they will set a court date or a date that they have to go down to the JFK building, one or the other, and they're told that date and they have to show up. And then it might turn into something else if they don't show up. But I don't think everybody that is in this country illegally that ends up getting stopped by the police or get inquired by ICE is deported. I think that there's...
Well, not now, because the system is set up to prioritize, bad criminals. But, our concern and the reason why this sanctuary city thing has come up is that we were promised a more aggressive and humane type of enforcement of the immigration laws. We were promised that. So, taking that promise
You
as
should say we were threatened with that.
well, whatever. Taking the promisor at his word, we're trying to figure out how we can protect both our humanity as a town as well as the people who would be victims of this more aggressive enforcement.
I'm speaking as a person and as a police chief, I'm not looking to more inhumanely enforce.
No, I'm not worried about you. I'm just trying to figure out, is there a way around the fact that once you arrest someone and fingerprint them, they are immediately in the crosshairs of ICE?
I would have to see what ICE actually does with their fingerprints, whether it's just a pass-through or if they do hold on to them. That I don't know.
So I
Once you run something,
no, go ahead, finish your thought.
I was just going to say, once you go through a system, it's not, the system has to be programmed to hold that information, otherwise it's just a pass-through. But they hold it.
So I have two questions. First, it sounds to me as though once the fingerprints go to the state police, we have no control over where they go from there. It's an agreement between the state police and the FBI and eventually ICE as to sharing of information.
Yes, except I do want to make a caveat. Everybody that's arrested.
Right.
It's one of the reasons, the main reason you make an arrest is to confirm the person's identity. The best way that we have in our society to do it right now is through a fingerprint.
Yeah, so there's no
So
policy.
that's how we do it.
Yeah, there's no policy we can put in place that says we're only sending these fingerprints to the state police and they can't go anywhere else. That's,
It really doesn't do us any good because of people that are from all over the country visiting Brookline and we've arrested them.
So my second question, and this is sort of tries to build on the point that Selectman Green was making. In your experience, in your opinion, how often is it that you arrest two parties in a domestic abuse situation because you can't sort out exactly what's happening at the scene? You bring people back to the station, you arrest everybody, and you let the courts figure it out, or you want to do a more in-depth interview in the station?
It's very rare. And I have to tell you, we don't track the ICE interactions that we get. They're very few and far between. We don't, just trying to get people institutional knowledge, when's the last time you can remember us holding someone on an ICE detainer or similar court? We couldn't really come up with a time. We did a search through our report writing system based on word association, so we did ICE and then we did detainer for the past year and nothing came up. We did, based on what's anticipated, or could be anticipated, we put a code in as of January 1st to any time that we have an ICE warrant or an ICE detainer of a person that we have in custody, it has to be noted, and there's a separate code that we note it in the computer. So as of January, a couple of days ago, we started doing that.
Do you get, so you occasionally do get the ICE detainer things, and this is somebody that immigration is telling you they want you to arrest, is that right?
They're already arrested on separate charges by us. We don't go out and serve.
Do you ever get something from ICE saying, be on the lookout for this person?
They may have it, and they tell you why, but most of the times they turn around and say, don't approach them, just notify.
Okay, but are they criminals, someone who's believed to have committed a criminal act, or just somebody who's believed to be illegal?
If I had to guess, I would guess the criminals. But a lot of times if they have somebody that they're going to come out for a person that has a warrant on them, they're probably going to come out and look for them themselves.
Okay. So, but in terms of your review of what the cities and towns surrounding us are doing in this area, is the common practice when somebody's fingerprinted, are the other cities and towns conveying those fingerprints to the state?
Yes.
And they go on to the FBI from there?
Yes, but it's everybody that's arrested. It doesn't matter where you're from. You could be from living across the street here, and we arrest you for something. Your fingerprints are going to go, and that's just the way we can securely make sure that we know who the person is that we're arresting, no matter what the crime.
Okay, and I just want you to emphasize this, because I think this is what you told me before. Nobody gets arrested in Brookline just on suspicion of being illegal.
Right.
It's because they've done something that would subject them to arrest.
They've done something, and then we submit
Something criminal other than being illegal.
Yes. Even if they're arrested and criminally charged, everybody is fingerprinted. Their fingerprints go that route.
Okay.
And they have been for a while now.
And so in the on the other cities and towns, though, is there anything that they are doing in terms of being sanctuary cities that we're not doing, or that we're not being more, that we should be more explicit about?
Several of them have set parameters to hold somebody on that immigration detainer. And like I mentioned, some of them was that you can hold them. Some of it has discretion to honor the ICE detainer in certain conditions, and the condition is legitimate law enforcement purposes not related to immigration or a criminal warrant. Cambridge has that same caveat. Cambridge has a couple of other things. Newton says it's they have a threat of posing a public safety threat, and things like that. We don't spell out that it's a public safety threat, but
we could have similar
right.
language
Yeah.
to those other communities.
Right. There are some areas of discretion that we're not explicitly stating, and perhaps we should, and
We could.
perhaps we should make some more proactive, have some more proactive policies.
and when Mr. Kleckner sent you that group of
Right.
policies out, they're spelled out in there.
Right.
One of the policies is Boston, I believe, has this trust, has implemented in their ordinances the so-called Trust Act, which I think refers to Transparency and Responsibility Using State Tools Act, which was introduced in Congress and the State House. Do you think that would be a useful thing for us to implement? I mean, it sets out certain procedures where, the town or the police will not or keep people in detention with respect to those who have not committed certain types of major crimes.
I see. I have their parameters here.
Yeah.
That they have set up.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess
I'm not opposed to setting parameters like that.
Let me just say, we're dealing with two things here, and I think we need to be careful that we distinguish them. Number one is the whole issue of arrest procedures, where we're kind of stuck in a corner, although there may be things we can do to reduce the risk that we may be facing in the upcoming months. And that's the responsibility of the Board of Selectmen in terms of developing procedures or revising procedures. A number of people have been talking about town meeting warrants, and I think that they need, and I think that's very important, but they need to realize that that's a separate issue from the arrest procedures we're talking about now. And I would urge them to make sure that any warrant article addresses those things that within town meetings responsibility. For example, support for immigrants and refugees in terms of health services, access to town services in general, things like that. But I think it's important to distinguish those two things as we think through this so-called sanctuary city issue.
The purpose of this is not to tonight affect policy, or not change policy, but to kind of get us up to speed and kind of give us a fact base and see if there are areas of discretion that we do have. And it seems that there is some areas of discretion, some areas that we can be more explicit in anticipation of some policy changes at the federal level. So I guess and I think that any change in policy should go through a process, including public participation. We're not just going to change policy. So then the next question is, okay, where do we go from here? And I think, and I've been thinking about, should we refer this to a committee or a commission? The first commission that comes to mind is the Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations Commission. And maybe what we should do is take this back, come up with a charge to refer to them.
I actually think, though, it sounds like our policies are not that different from some of these other cities and towns, but they are more explicit in some areas. I don't even know if it needs to go for a lot of committee study. I think it might be something that we could propose, have a public hearing on, and move forward on pretty quickly.
The board, at least I'm participating in this review of the policies and procedures of the police department in connection with the reaccreditation. That's one context within which we could do this. And give that some thought.
So why don't we do this? Let's not make a decision tonight on where we're going. The body, I think, whether it needs a lot of committee process or not, I think it needs some process. And let's think about.
Well, I'm certainly not averse to, if we're proposing something, to sending it to the Diversity Committee for comment. I'm not trying to cut them out. I'm just saying that I don't know whether this needs. I think some of it is stuff we might be able to move forward on pretty quickly, and we don't need to have, months while we send it through a long process. That could be a pretty quick process, is what I'm saying.
Well, I think we might learn something, if a small group of people are going to really study these other communities, study what they do. It sounds to me like we may be doing some of the same things, we're just not being explicit about it. Is that a fair?
Yeah, I think I'd draw your attention to Cambridge's policy. I think that's the most explicit policy of the group that you have. Cambridge is pretty encompassing.
Right. So, maybe it is worth being a little more, in these troubled times, if you will, it's worth maybe being a little more explicit about what we're going to do and what we're not going to do. So I think it's worth looking at, maybe it's worth looking beyond our neighbors. I mean, what are communities elsewhere doing? I know that this is an issue that people are talking about across the country. So we always tend to look to our neighbors, but it may be that we could look outside our own geographic area and
Yeah, that's a good, I mean, can we
Come up with
just,
some
can I ask, I
ideas.
know you didn't want this to be a real public hearing, but I wonder if any of our audience has any knowledge beyond the policies that our neighboring communities that the chief has collected for us. If anyone wants to throw in any suggestions that might be worth looking at.
For once, I'm going to be
Mr. Rosenthal.
Yeah.
very quick. Marty
Please.
Rosenthal. I'm also co-chair of PACS, and I think I was the lead sponsor on the 2006 resolution, and I was on the Board of Selectmen for the 1985 one.
You're dating yourself.
Yes, I know. Well, a lot of things have dated myself recently. But I know that there's an ACLU Model Trust Act that's being proposed in a lot of places and might show up on the warrant for May. So it talks about a lot of the same things that the chief has talked about. The biggest difference they make, I think, is a big difference, is judicial warrants versus administrative warrants. And there's a basic distrust, which I share, of administrative warrants that are issued without a judge and without probable cause. So that's a big dividing line, and I know the chief alluded to it, and that I know that the Trust Act, the Model Trust Act that is being proposed in other communities will address that.
Yeah, the Boston one says, shall not detain an individual on the basis of a civil immigration detainer.
Right.
Is that
I think that's what they're referring to, the ICE detainers,
right?
administrative.
Okay.
Yeah, and I know that, I don't know if the Boston one was Boston one is called trust as opposed to sanctuary. I think they labeled their ordinance a trust ordinance.
I mean, it's an act that was actually introduced in Congress and in the state legislature.
Yeah, I'm not positive. I'll take your word for it, but I don't know the correlation. Yeah. But anyway, so there are models out there that may or may not be similar to the other communities that the chief has mentioned. So, anyway, thank you. Oh.
So I'm sensitive to Selectman Daley's timing concern, but I think this is a case where the intricacies of the policy are incredibly important. And I think while our policy and that of Boston and Somerville and Amherst and Cambridge may not be all that different, I think it's worth having a small group dig into this a little bit deeper, especially as the landscape may change over the next 30, 60, 90 days. And we just simply don't have the bandwidth here to dig in and do a deep dive and rewrite a policy. So I think that's an argument to send it to the Diversity and Inclusion Community Relations Commission.
So,
I would agree with that.
and next week we'll come back with a formal charge for the Diversity, Inclusion, Community Relations Commission.
Okay, so we'll be doing sort of redundancy here. I mean, there's no problem with that. It's just that you should be aware that we're going to be looking at that in connection with the reaccreditation, looking at the policies. that
So
affect
part of
that
it
as
should
well
be
as-
coordination, I guess.
So I think that the commission's charge should be broader than just the arrest issues. You know, they're-
Okay. And we'll work with Dr. Gelano in crafting the charge, and then please let Ms. Race know that this is coming. Is that it? Okay. Thank you. So the next and last agenda item is the annual town meeting and election date setting.
Good evening. You have a proposed schedule in front of you, which would call for an opening of the warrant on February 9th, which is a Thursday, closing on March 9th, which is also a Thursday, and then having our annual election on May 2nd, which is a Tuesday, and that would line us up for having town meeting on May 23rd, and in the spring, we go every other. So it would be May 23rd, a Tuesday, then May 25th, a Thursday, and then, if necessary, May 30th, a Tuesday, and June 1st, a Thursday.
When is Memorial Day?
The weekend prior, I'm sorry, the weekend, it's wedged in between, which is how it was last year as well.
The 29th. There's the 22nd.
29th, I believe.
Memorial Day, the 29th. Okay.
So my only issue is that April 11th, I believe, is the first night of Passover, and we're scheduled to do board review, so we're just going to have to deal with that down the road and shift to a Wednesday meeting or something else.
Yep.
Yeah, we're not voting on that piece of it.
I'm just flagging it for people who may express a concern
Right.
in the next 12 to 24 hours after Thanksgiving.
Appreciate that, thank you.
Okay, so I will move that we set the dates for the annual town meeting and town election as presented on the sheet before us, which would be, the election would be May 2nd, town meeting would begin on May 23rd, and then go 25th, 30th, and if necessary, June 1st.
I will just say that I always find it kind of annoying when town meeting goes on after Memorial Day. Is there any way we can move all of this up a week, so?
These dates have already been talked about with the town moderator and the town clerk, and I think some vacations were already planned based on this tentative schedule.
The town moderator always plans a vacation for...
Well, let me just say that having Memorial Day in the middle is a good incentive to be pithy in remarks, expedient in proceedings.
Yeah, but there's
Sometimes.
no way you can finish in 2 nights for the spring town meeting with the budget. So once you've gone over to the next week,
Well, that was a vote for town meeting took a vote,
I know, I voted against it.
as did I, and majority rules.
And I think, there needs to be a little
Can we
bit of a
bring that
gap
up
for the town
again
clerk.
and ask for revisit?
We could, but it wouldn't happen until town meeting. Okay, did we vote the dates? I don't think we did. Okay. There's a motion on the table. All those in favor, please say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman Franco?
Aye.
Selectman Heller?
Aye.
Selectman Green?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I think that concludes our business for tonight.